This past decade, the Cavs have really struggled minus the 4 seasons that LeBron came back and won them a championship and took them to 4 straight finals. But really, right after LeBron left, the Cavs went straight back to the bottom of the standings. And with many teams in the East improving this offseason, I think the Cavs are going to find themselves near the bottom yet again. I was interested in the Drummond trade that they made last season, especially since they didn't really have to give up much to get him. There's a lot of people saying that he's a bad player, but I think that has more to do with his contract really than anything else. Because if we just ignore the contract and only look at the player, Drummond is still arguably the best rebounder in the league. He's an underrated passer, and he is really good around the rim too. Defensively, he's not great, but he's not bad either. The issue people have with Drummond is that, like I said, he's going to be paid $28 million this season, and he just doesn't fit the mold of a modern day center. He's not a great post-up player or perimeter shooter, and unlike a guy like Rudy Gobert, who also isn't the most skilled offensive big in the league, he's pretty much an average defender. But Drummond is in the final year of his contract, so if Cleveland could bring him back on a deal for something like 3 years, $50 to $55 million, I think that would be a pretty reasonable contract. He is also only 27, so he is still pretty young. Then Kevin Love, he's still under contract for 3 more years, and he's making a lot of money, around like 30 million a season. So I think he's going to be with the team for the foreseeable future, just because it's going to be hard to move his deal because of the injury issues he's had, and because although he's a great shooter and he can still do things on the offensive end, he's not a great defender. If he can stay healthy next year, he's got a pretty similar skill set to Drummond in the sense that he is great on the glass and he's a nice passer as well. And like I said, he's a great shooter. He can space the floor, and he's still a guy who you can throw the ball down to in the post for an easy bucket. But like Drummond, he's also an average to below average defender, probably more so on the like below average side. He's a pretty good team defender, but he's not great in the like on the ball or in the pick and roll. And even though Love and Drummond are average defenders at best, they aren't unplayable on that end necessarily. And for what it's worth, rebounding is a part of defense because you've got to finish possessions, and those guys are two of the best in the league in that. Overall, this team is going to be pretty bad defensively, though. And other than Okoro, who they just drafted, and Larry Nance, there aren't any other above average defenders on this team, which will ultimately be their main downfall this year. Offensively, though, they could be pretty decent. Like I said, Kevin Love, he's still a good shooter and scorer, and Colin Sexton averaged 20 a game on good efficiency last year, and he'll probably get even better this season. He's still pretty young, and I also think that Darius Garland is going to show a lot of improvement this year. People do forget that Garland had a really serious injury in college, which kept him out for, I think, all but 5 games that year. And usually when players have injuries that keep them out for all or most of the season, they don't get back to their normal level of play until their second year removed from that injury. So this year Garland should be 100% healthy, and I think he'll be more efficient on the offensive end because of that. I think Chetty Osman is probably going to round out the starting lineup with Sexton, Garland, Love, and Drummond. Like pretty much everyone else on the team, Osman is not a good defender, which is one of the reasons why the Cavs did draft Okoro. But he is a guy that can play off the ball offensively and make good decisions when he does have the ball. He shot 38% from three last year on 5 attempts per game, which is why I do think he's going to start over Okoro, at least at the beginning of the season. He's not great at playing through contact at the rim, though, or drawing fouls, but as long as he's used on offense to where he's mainly spotting up and letting Sexton and Garland create most of the offense, he can still be valuable on offense as a floor spacer. Then off the bench, they do have a few guys that I like. Larry Nance, he's a good defender and he's good in the pick and roll. And while I think Okaro will struggle with his shot early on, I've heard that he's a really hard worker, so he should be able to develop that one day. He is great defensively, and I think that he's going to be able to make an impact as a tough, versatile defender right away. The guy that I do really like, though, off their bench is Kevin Porter Jr. He showed a lot of potential as a shooter and a scorer last season. He was great in catch and shoot situations, and he's a really good athlete with lots of ability around the rim. He wasn't great shooting off the dribble his rookie season, but he does have a really nice handle, and he can create a lot of separation on his shots. It's just a matter of him like finishing the plays. But as he works in the off season each year, I think he's only going to get better at that. He was a pretty good playmaker too. He's definitely not elite, but he became pretty good as the season progressed at finding the open guy when he drew help from a defender, like a lot of dump off pass situations to bigs. And if he's playing in lineups with Drummond, I think that could be really good. If Porter's driving down the lane and he draws help from the opposing big, he can give Drummond some easy looks around the rim where he's really good at finishing. There is room for improvement on the defensive end with him, but he wasn't bad for a rookie on that end of the floor. He's a pretty good team defender, playing off the ball. He did have a tendency to like overhelp sometimes, but overall he was respectable as like a off-ball defender. Where he does need to improve is on the ball. They also picked up Damien Dotson too, which I thought was a pretty underrated signing. He didn't get much time on the Knicks, or at least not consistent minutes with them, but he is a really good shooter and he has potential to be a nice scorer off the bench for them. Then they got Dante Exum, and I mean he had a lot of potential when he got drafted, but at this point he's looking like a Michael Carter Williams 2.0 in my opinion. And just overall, this team has pretty good potential to be a good offensive team, but defensively they're just really weak, and because of that I think they're going to be one of the worst defensive teams in the league. And I've got the Cavs finishing 12th in the East at 25-47. This team could be a little bit better if Kevin Love was fully healthy for all 72 games, but I'm basing my prediction off the assumption that he's most likely going to miss about 15 to 20 games this year. He played 56 games last year, but he has had some injury problems, and yeah, I'm just basing it off the fact that he's probably going to miss some time. And it's also worth considering that Cleveland could end up trading Drummond and maybe Love if they're able to for some young guys and picks at the deadline, which could ultimately make their record worse in the second half of the year. Like I said, Love, he's probably going to be pretty hard to move though, so they'll likely be holding on to him this year. I think that Cavs fans should be watching 4 players in particular this year, and those guys are Drummond, Garland, Porter, and Okoro. Because if Drummond can fit in nicely with this team, I would be in favor of them signing him to like a 3-year, $54 million deal, as he is still pretty young. Okoro, he's really interesting based off the potential he has on the defensive end, and if he can show signs of being a 3-point shooter, he'll likely replace Chetty in the starting lineup by the end of the year. If Garland disappoints this season and Porter continues to improve, I could see him replacing Garland in the starting lineup as well. Like I said earlier, there are some nice young players on this team, and because they're going to finish with one of the worst records in the league, most likely, they're going to get a good draft pick because of that. And this 2021 draft class, it's supposed to be really, really good. So there's reason to be optimistic if you're a Cavs fan. If their young guys can develop this season, they're able to sign Drummond to a fair contract, and they can get another top 5 draft pick in 2021. The Cavs, they'll be in a good spot going forward.